Hello and welcome to our webinar, Managing the Post-Pandemic Workforce, Empowerment versus Oversight. I'm Allison Ryder, Senior Project Editor of MIT Sloan Management Review, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Our speakers today are Michael Schrage, a Research Fellow at the MIT Sloan Initiative on the Digital Economy, and David Kiron, Executive Director of MIT Sloan Management Review. I'm really excited to be on this session. Michael and David have been frequent collaborators on MIT SMR Big Ideas research projects. We've focused our studies on strategic measurement, performance management, the future of the workforce, and most recently, the future of leadership. They have also co-developed a popular article, Strategy for and with AI, which I would encourage folks to check out. These topic areas may seem far-ranging, but they actually share a common denominator of analyzing individual success for workers and the enterprise, and where those two overlap. And there's some really interesting elements there that we'll get into a bit today. So as I said, I'm excited to bring these speakers together today. They have a stimulating talk planned for you all on the future of workplace and workforce analytics. And as we've seen the COVID-19 pandemic force organizations to really reconsider how to manage and track remote, hybrid, and now in-person workforces, a lot has shifted, and our speakers have some interesting insights to share with you. So with that, we are ready to get started. And Michael, I think I'll hand things over to you to give us a little preamble on what we're talking about today, and then we have some data to share with you all.
Great, thank you so much, Allison. And just to reinforce what Allison said, Allison, David, and I have really been partners on a variety of these different projects. And when we look at the entirety of the work, there are a couple of themes that really stand out. And I would just like you to listen and engage with us around this as what I think is the key emergent organizing principle. What's the future of data-driven performance management? What we see, what we've seen, what we've experienced around instrumentation, digitalization, and the explosion by orders of magnitude of relevant, actionable data has really been transformative. And it changes the nature of the relationship between individuals, their teams, their managers, their processes, their programs, and indeed the enterprise. It changes qualitatively and quantitatively the nature of feedback. So the notion of what is performance management, and what kind of relevant data is going to inform how we improve performance and performance management is really, really key. And when you look at what's gone on during the pandemic and the discussions that we'll address shortly on the return, hybrid workforces and innovations in technology, innovations in algorithms, I think this issue of data-driven performance management has to become more important for us as individuals, for us as managers, for us as leaders. I think it's a huge, huge deal, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to discuss this with David, with Allison, and with you. So with that, Allison, I'd like to kick it back to you, because I think we asked people certain questions, and I think the answer to these questions is going to set the context for some of the conversation that follows.
We did. So on our next slide, you may recall, thank you to it was about 1,300 or so of you who answered this poll, the set of poll questions that we proposed upon your registration. So first question we asked, a bit of a loaded one, I'm sure. Should employers put tracking tools on employees' personal phones? Michael, what do you think about the spread we see here? Are you surprised, unsurprised? Well, David, any comments?
Frame the question a little more artfully, because the goal was not to quote unquote track people's personal phones, but the reality, and it is the reality, is that there seems to be a harmonic convergence or disharmonic convergence between people's work phones and their personal phones. And the idea that an employer can track and gain insight from people's devices as to how they're utilizing their time strikes me as logical. It also strikes me as completely logical that the overwhelming majority of people do not want their bosses to be tracking them directly or even indirectly on personal devices. David?
Michael, do you have anything to say about that 6%? I mean, we had over 1,000 people responding to this poll, and 6%, that's 60. If we were in an exec ed class, that number would constitute an entire class or two. So
well, my tongue-in-cheek response is they made a mistake. My more
I mean, they're on the webinar. They're on the webinar right now.
Right now. I mean,
the pragmatic response is, I do believe that there are leaders and managers and people in organizations who trust their leaders and managers and colleagues that, this is not a big deal. They trust people not to abuse the access that they have. And needless to say, that issue of trust and transparency is going to be one that's going to be an organizing principle for this conversation.
what about the next question? Would you trust your manager to improve your performance by letting them see weekly summary data of your digital device use? So not conditional upon letting someone, put tracking tools on your personal phone. Spread gets a little bit smaller. The don't knows grow a little bit more. What do we think about this?
David, would you like me to lead again on this?
Yeah, go for it.
This didn't surprise me at all. I believe, everybody on this webinar has heard of the Pareto principle, 20%, 80% rule. I believe that the overwhelming majority of people in organizations don't really have a high degree of trust. I do believe that there are organizations, maybe 20% of them, where people see what happens when you have a healthy relationship with each other and with data. And so, yeah, it's worth it. It's a good deal to trust it. The majority of people don't. The interesting thing is that, to me, the more interesting number here is the number of people who don't know on this. Gee, what would happen if we created this kind of visibility and transparency around data? I think one of the most important things I would like to see, and we're going to be doing polls later, is will that 2/3 shrink if there are things that managers and leaders and organizations can do to convert transparency and visibility into greater trust? I think that's the wild card in all of this, because without doubt, this issue of monitoring and tracking in order to improve individual and team and organizational performance, that is huge. Huge, huge, huge. The more digital organizations and their customers become, the more important this issue becomes.
But like one of the things, Michael, you're getting at is that there's this dynamic between trust and monitoring and what it's for. And to what extent do you actually need trust to do effective monitoring, whether it's for control or for empowerment? And if you don't have that trust, then there could really be that can really limit what you're able to do with your monitoring efforts.
Yes, but I'm not one of these, as you know, because you work with me, I'm not one of these let's hold hands and sing kumbaya types. I think trust has to be earned, and particularly in this era. And so as important as trust is, I think it is incumbent upon management and leaders and HR and the enterprise to do things to win and earn trust. We can still have monitoring without quote unquote trust. We'll have some examples of that. But absolutely, I think that if you're not using these technologies to build trust, you are not a good manager. You are not a good leader.
All right, let's go to the next one.
So would your own work and teamwork improve if you had greater and more consistent visibility into how your key colleagues manage their time on their machines or devices? I think we're seeing a trend line in that don't know bar. That's what I always look at.
Interesting. Isn't that interesting? Yes. The don't know.
Are we just asking tough questions?
Yeah. I think that there's a very clear signal here that greater visibility and transparency around the people with whom we work, that can add value, that can add insight, that can add analytical improvement. The potential is there. You still have half the people saying no, but you see, now I'm going to ask them a question, and if you interpret this as in your face, feel free. If I give you greater visibility into your colleagues and how they spend and invest their time and what they're working on, are you really telling me that you wouldn't be able to get value from this? Are you really telling me that that information is irrelevant to your own productivity, to your own insight? Tell you what, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I believe on average, more information, better information leads to more insight and better insight, particularly with the people that we're working with.
Yeah, I don't know. So what struck me about this was there's almost like an asymmetry between people saying, look, I don't want to be monitored so closely or have my digital devices monitored, but I can see benefit in having other people like have that happen to them.
Did you say inconsistency or hypocrisy, David?
I said asymmetry.
Oh, asymmetry.
You can overlay hypocrisy if you like,
Okay.
but I'm not taking that step.
Okay. David is the nicer of the two of us, and Allison, of course, is the nicest of us, of the three.
Of all.
Yeah. So nice of you to say. Well, I think it's interesting here too. I mean, you've layered on the teamwork question, and you've inherently increased the scope of this to, it's gone beyond the one-to-one manager, individual contributor to, now let's look at measuring team performance. And I know you'll talk about that as we get through the presentation, the different kind of layers of contributor here, but that's another distinction and a complexity to note, I think, as well.
Absolutely. And if I may foreshadow, if you think about it, improved monitoring is the kind of thing that leads to the return of the 360-degree job review, performance review. You know, this is 360-degree review 2.0.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the comments I've been getting and questions, and I don't want to detract too much to let you get into your presentation, but you know, I'm just hearing shades of the 360, you know, as people talk about, well, what if this were anonymous? And I just sort of have that PTSD reaction to, you get 360 feedback and you don't quite know where it's coming from, and is that productive enough to help you really measurably improve your own performance?
But I'm glad that you raised that, because the issues of anonymity or aggregation, you know, to smear these things, those are absolutely legitimate questions and concerns. And I think it feeds very well into the slide you're going to show us next. Because I think this is where the real challenge emerges. Are we monitoring people for greater control? Or are we monitoring people to facilitate and enable empowerment? If I give you 1 order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude, 3 orders of magnitude more data and analytics, am I using it to improve control? Do I get a better return on control with that data and analytics? Or am I going to get a greater return in productivity and performance by empowering individuals and teams? Now, this is not an either or false dichotomy. I think it's a renegotiation, because of course management wants to maintain and have meaningful oversight and control. The flip side is, does that meaningful oversight and control come at the expense of enabling greater empowerment? Is the purpose of these performance management tools to turn employees and associates into better meat puppets, or to give them a greater degree of agency and initiative and opportunity to work with each other and for each other better? I think this is the dominant leadership and managerial challenge. I think the rise of digitalization and instrumentation and the networked enterprise makes this one of the most important, serious issues that organizations all over the world have to address, and indeed are addressing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Michael. Maybe not surprisingly, the amount of and there are all these rich issues that we're going to get into around what is the monitoring for? Is it to make managers better managers, or is it to make employees better employees, or what is the mix?
Exactly. And by the way, anybody who's listening to this webinar who believes that that question is going to be answered by HR is kidding themselves.
Yeah.
This is not, HR needs to be involved, but they're not in a position to own the answer to that question. It is not clear, and let's all agree that if there's one organization that absolutely shouldn't be allowed to answer that question, it's the IT people or the digital transformation people. So one of the reasons why we're doing this is such an important, serious issue that we want to really come to grips with this fundamental tension and fundamental conflict. And we're counting on you, people participating here, to send us comments and questions so that we have a greater clarity around the trade-offs between control and empowerment and purpose. If you think about it, this is the real future of workplace analytics. You can look at the excellent Laszlo Bock book, Work Rules, and his Humu company. You can look at the variety of all the things being done, performance analytics to study how do we get top talent to do better and mediocre talent to move closer and deliver more. But this is really, this tension and this conflict, this oversight versus empowerment issue, I think this is where this is the real battleground for the future of workplace analytics. Is this about putting more power at the top, or the democratization of insight, the democratization of agency, the democratization of initiative and opportunity? I think this is about the future of the organization and the role that data plays in allowing the future of the organization to have a healthier relationship between oversight and empowerment.
Right, because the future of the workplace is shifting. Just the workplace itself is completely undergoing change. And analytics, there are. It's not just the power of the tools these days, but the amount of data, the amount and variety of data that can be collected, and the way the data is collected are going to be absolutely crucial, because the data that you collect on people and what they're doing and the results they're producing, that data can be collected in an intrusive way, in a subtle way, and ways that engender trust or undermine trust.
But that leads to the next slide. The things that David just spoke about were interesting rhetorical questions pre-COVID. COVID was the dominant disruptor here, okay? You didn't ask people to work remote. There was no choice. There was no choice. The overwhelming majority of people were working remotely, and the result was there was a drive for all these people working remotely. How do we see what they're doing? How do we keep track? And now, as there's a light at the end of the tunnel and we're returning back to work, there's discussion about hybridization. Gee, do we still monitor the remote people, but not the people who come to work? So the fact that we had this pandemic, this global pandemic, the fact that organizations are revisiting every single workplace fundamental that they have as we debate how best to come back. Should we be hybrid, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, 5 days a week? These questions are not just important questions, they're urgent questions, because organizations, I doubt, are going to abandon remote monitoring. I think every organization that I'm engaging with is saying, geez, no matter how we come back, we need to rethink how we collect data, analyze, and integrate data between the people working remotely and between the people working on site. Where does it add value and insight? Where does it get in the way? These numbers speak for themselves. Then again, everybody on this call, you've been living this. This is no news to you.
Yeah, this monitoring equity issue, I think, is going to be fascinating to track. So I wanted to ask you this, specifically in relation to this slide. Like, do you suspect that managers aren't feeling like they have a lot of control these days, period, and that their personnel is one area where they can feel like they have control, and so some of the monitoring and control, like more control heavy types of monitoring sort of issue from just that fact alone? Or is that oversimplifying?
I don't think it's oversimplified. I think it's a very, I think it's a very interesting question. I actually believe that most managers, the surveys that I've seen is that most managers feel more empowered because people are having to make themselves transparent to the managers. I think that the real question is, how are the managers themselves being held accountable? And that's something we haven't done as much work on. And that's something that I'm really looking for comments and insights and contributions from the people on this webinar. But I think we should press on. I'm just going to state the obvious here. This monitoring stuff wasn't just COVID related. You look at laparoscopic surgery. How do you do laparoscopic surgery? You do it through a video. You don't look at the patient's guts directly. You look at them through a video monitor. Increasingly, doctors are doing video reviews and video monitoring of their procedures. We've had from the get-go in commercial aviation and in military aviation, monitoring and instrumentation of cockpits to see what kind of mistakes, what kind of capabilities pilots have. And in law enforcement, body cams, extraordinarily controversial, extraordinarily important. The whole notion of how are people who put themselves in harm's way or are responsible for the lives of others track and monitor themselves and their engagements? How do we review? How do we analyze? How do we use that to improve performance in medicine, in aviation, in law enforcement, and of course, because it's MIT and we have the sports analytics conference in sports, performance monitoring, digitalization of tracking of performance, huge, huge, huge. There's a lot of places to learn from this, but what's the key insight? The key insight is these organizations, these institutions are committed to learning from data. They're committed to tracking employee performance and checking on compliance, observing for possible insights, and pushing for ongoing improvement. That is huge, and it's not possible. It's not possible without the instrumentation, digitalization, and analysis. This is one of my favorite examples, Amazon Mentor. I just found out today, as I was reviewing for this, that there was actually a Reddit thread about how to cheat Mentor. What is Mentor? Mentor is what those Amazon delivery people put on their phones to track how safely they drive and deliver. There's also tracking in those Amazon vans that you see. And this is the whole, Uber and Lyft have counterparts to Amazon Mentor, which is from eDriver. But this is the whole paradigm of you're working, your algorithm is your boss. Your algorithm determines your performance. Your algorithm sets the parameters for your performance. The algorithm may even give you advice on your performance. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And that's how Amazon gets to be Amazon and Uber gets to be Uber. The same is true for white collar workers. You know, there's this nice New York Times story about the HubStaff workforce monitoring. And this is pretty much, you know, this is Mentor for white collar / knowledge workers. This is the sort of tracking here. This is a bit of software that does very, very well for this, for the organizations and for HubSpot. So I think it's very, very interesting. And I don't think this is an aberration. I think this is workforce monitoring 1.5. David, Allison?
I just say very, very quickly that when we started talking about this, it was all about kind of having your boss monitor you and kind of track your movements. But there are these tools that actually stand between the manager and the employee. And some of the gamification that seems to be happening is like with those tools, and and through those tools there can be manipulation of the manager. But it's whether it's, again, we come back to whether or not these tools are actually engendering trust, undermining trust, or it's very often the case it's very seldom the case that these tracking tools have no effect whatsoever on trust.
Agreed, and I think we should deal in the Q&A about the whole gamesmanship and gaming these systems. But I'm glad that you raised that, David, because in my own work, I came across an Adobe manager who shared his dashboard via Slack and the other in-house chat channels with his team. And they sort of built up a team culture of sharing your dashboard about deliverables. And there were organizations that set up Calendly. I'm sure you've seen that. You set up a calendar. How visible do you make your calendar? Are you encouraged to set aside blocks of time for, all hail Cal Newport deep work, 2-hour, 3-hour blocks? How visible do you want to make these calendars? So you can do it directly, you can do it indirectly. Indeed, if you want to be devious, you can do correlations between how people actually spend their time and what they post on their calendars. So this issue, as David rightly points out, it both invites gaming, but at the same time, it really is going to force organizations to decide how much they want to trust their people and what kind of transparency they want to build around that trust. I think this is a good time for a poll.
Let's launch the poll. Give everyone about a minute or so to weigh in. I'll voice over the question for you, just so why not? Do you trust your managers or leaders to use this information? So, keeping in mind everything we've been talking about, data gathering around performance.
Exactly. Right. Do you trust to use to support you or control you? To develop.
So is this about, yep.
Yes.
I get to see the numbers as they come in. This is interesting. I'm going to give it a few more seconds here. I think, and trust is a loaded word here. I've been getting a lot of comments. We can touch on this in the Q&A, but, are we using data and instrumentation almost as a substitute, or are we leapfrogging trust, right? Are we just sort of thinking these tools will lead to different outcomes when, you may just have a relationship with your boss that isn't based on that level of trust, transparency that you feel like that you'll feel comfortable sharing information about your performance.
So I had one of the people that I spoke with for the piece that I did, he did the twist on the Reagan trust but verify. He said verify but trust. Wow, look at that split. But look at this, fascinating, and thank you to everybody to contribute. But now, forget what David, Allison, and I are saying to you. Here's the split right there. Look at that split. Okay, if I am in the C-suite of an organization and I see 30-30, this kind of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 split around trust, I better be revisiting the way I'm messaging and working with my people. Okay, is it development? Is it control? Or people not sure? Okay. Wow, fascinating. Maybe the next poll question will help inform. I'm sorry, David, do you have a reaction to this as well, or Allison?
No, I was just scanning the comments. Please, if you have a qualitative sort of justification or rationale for your response, send it in to us. We'll voice those over for you. But
absolutely,
the split doesn't surprise me. I think it's, like I said, a loaded question, and I think there's interpretation underneath it about what is trust, what is this information, to what end. Are you taking into account, a lot of the comments have been around, well, what about productivity and work product? Are you just looking at my time at my device? Do you care more about that I'm spending time doing something versus I'm actually producing what you need? And where is that being measured?
Yeah, the only thing I would say here is that there's this connection between, you can't have like a conversation, like a focus, a leadership focus, an HR focus on employee experience, and then have a completely separate group and separate set of activities around monitoring. There is a connection between employee experience and these monitoring efforts.
David is exactly right. Exactly right.
Next
Should
one.
we ask one more question? All right. So give you another minute to answer this one. What impact would your manager's
I
access
want
to
a voiceover on this one. What impact would your manager's access to this information have on you? Would it be significant? Would it be marginal? Or you're not sure? So we're talking about control. We're talking about development and assessment. Is it big impact or marginal impact based on your relationship with your manager? Or you don't know? That maybe if your manager had this information that put the screws to you, or they'd be more supportive.
So preview of coming attractions, right out of the gate, we had a lot saying significant, and that number is dropping as votes come in, but give you a few more.
We could have flipped this question and said, you know, if you had access to your employees, do they, your direct reports, would they think it would be significant, or your impact on them would be marginal or significant? You know?
All right, I think we can take a look at these results.
Wow.
What do you think?
Wow. I'm struck by the don't knows, but marginal is interesting, because what my inference from the marginal is that they have enough access now that increasing access wouldn't make that much of a difference. But for 44%, it is potentially significant. Okay, I'm going to tell you my perspective. It's going to be 2/3. I think the more information your manager has about how you do things and how you do things with other people, how well you play with others, back to the 360-degree review again, I think it would have a significant impact, very significant. David?
So I can't actually see the results. So is it mostly significant?
Yes. Well, yes and no. 44% significant, 36% marginal, 21% don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what's curious, we don't know whether it's significant positive impact or negative impact, but it's just it's going to have a large effect, and I think that's. I think it's a really interesting result that shows that like access to information about you, people care about that, and people sort of anticipate other people having information about what they're doing is going to have an effect on them in some way, and there remains this question about whether or not it's going to undermine or empower.
So we're going to move on to the next one, but for the people who entered marginal, I'd love you to elaborate as to why you think it would only be marginal. We'd love to hear why you think it would only be marginal.
All right, let's keep going.
We should push on.
Okay, keep going.
And this is a theme that David has stressed, so I'm going to double down on this and have David articulate it.
So this article here, The Control Function of Management, which is published in 1982, is one of
How many years ago was that, David?
Sorry?
How many years ago is that, David?
That would be 39 some years ago.
I'm sorry, please just, yes.
Close to 4 decades ago, this piece was published, and it's one of the, and actually the content that's right there is, shows that control has been an important part of the management literature for literally decades, and control is one of the essential functions of management. This particular piece actually was talking about how you need to have a more expansive notion of control that includes some of the things that we're talking about, where it's not just measurement, it's not just feedback, but there should also be some sort of empowerment aspects. But it was all within the context of sort of expanding the notion of control rather than sort of having like empowerment be something separate from
and just to append what David is saying, this, I think, is the original sin that we run into when it comes to instrumentation and digitalization. that the majority of people and the majority of enterprise cultures bring that control legacy to surveillance, to measurement. And most people rightly mistrust, distrust, or are suspicious of information and data gathering that is simply going to reinforce that managerial control imperative.
Yep.
You want to go to the next one?
Yeah.
And that's why we did, by the way, this is the work that David and I and Allison have been all doing. We're looking at what kind of measurement approaches go beyond mere control. How can you measure in ways that deliberately seek to strike a new balance between empowerment, oversight, and insight? And we've been very fortunate to have organizations like Google and McKinsey, and this was the article that I wrote that wasn't sponsored, but assorted clients, but also ActiveTrack is sponsoring this. These are the issues that we believe are really, really important. And at the core of them all is not just what are we measuring, but why are we measuring it? Are we measuring it for our best interests, our customers' best interests, our employees and associates' best interests, our shareholders' best interests? In this context here, we believe that for workplace workforce monitoring, how you measure for empowerment has to be different than how you measure for oversight or control.
Exactly. I'm mindful of the time, so I'm just going to keep going.
And, you know, I know that some of you are spitting at your screens or your phones because it's always culture, but yes, because the one thing that Allison, David, and I continually find, not just with our sponsors, but with the companies who are kind enough to work with us and be a part of our research and investigation, is that the cultural imperatives, the cultural norms, you know, the way we do things around here, that dominates. That has an enormous influence. You know, if you have a Kaizen, continuous improvement culture, like a Toyota, people are going to respond to measurement differently than it's like, you know, do it or else. If you have a compliance culture, the immediate reaction is, that's another thing that I need to comply to. Gee, is there a way I can cut a corner to avoid, you know, the extra pain in the butt this kind of monitoring causes? Culture matters more in this environment, not less. Cultural transformation and digital transformation overlap way more than most people acknowledge.
Right. So in a way, culture conditions the kind of monitoring that you're doing. It also the monitoring can have an effect on the culture. There's a dynamic between the culture and the monitoring. And if the monitoring efforts that you're doing, it's, you know, if you have this notion of like, well, our culture is focused on empowering employees, but the monitoring actually is not congruent with those with that image, then you have challenge. There's a dynamic there.
Exactly. And, you know, these are the simple discriminators. These are the cultural tools and components. Okay, what is your culture of oversight versus what is your culture of empowerment? How do you weight it? Is it 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 3-to-1, 1-to-1, 1-to-3? Where do you draw the line? How do you negotiate it? Who owns, if the lawyers own oversight and HR owns empowerment, you're going to have a conflict. You're not going to be an integrated organization. You're going to have debate after debate and fight after fight. Let's do the next one.
Yeah.
This is the big split that we found in performance management. We have organizations that are so concerned about assessment, how are you doing, that development becomes the laggard. It becomes the tail end. You know, are you leading with assessment, leading with development? Are you monitoring employees with the notion of disciplining them or improving them or helping them improve? These are not subtle distinctions. But I'm going to tell you what David and I and Allison all found out. When you listen to people talk, some of these organizations really haven't thought these things through. And what's the complicating factor? Instrumentation and digitalization. Things that made sense when David Garvin wrote his control piece in 1982 are literally obsolete, literally anachronistic. Who owns the balance between assessment and development for monitoring in your organization? Is it HR? Is it the individual manager? Who owns that? Do you have a people analytics person? We'd love to know. And that's, we'll just spend a moment. This is what our call to action is. We need to revisit, research, and rethink how you empower people, not just enhance managerial or oversight. Not that enhancing managerial oversight isn't important, because managers need that visibility. They need to be able to see what's going on. They need situational and organizational awareness, but it cannot come overwhelmingly at the cost of empowerment and helping people feel better about themselves, engage better with each other, and perform better in their own minds and hearts. That's the question. We'd love to see your answers. One last thing on this. We did work with ADP, and they have an interesting behavioral economics group. And one of the things they were doing was putting together a coaching program that they get this data, and they use this data to basically inform managers as to how they can coach and monitor and mentor people. So it's monitoring for mentorship. It's insight for facilitation and improvement. So it's not just about assessment, it's assessment as a means to a development end. And we're keeping our eye on that. David, you told me there were 100 organizations using it already?
More than 100, more than 100. All right, let's keep going. So these are the takeaways.
So we're whipping through this because we do want this, but I believe—
we want to get to the questions. We want to get to your questions.
Okay. Clear transparency and visibility into policies. My advice, write the monitoring manifesto. This is why we're monitoring you. This is the compliance aspect. This is the oversight aspect. This is the development aspect. Publicly, visibly, transparently commit. Employees measure engagement, organizations measure engagement. You got to start measuring trust. And you have to propose oversight innovations. If you can improve your ability to be big brother, you better not do it by fiat. You better win consensus, or at least create some sort of dialogue. And this is like right out of medicine. You need informed consent, not complicated, impossible to understand legal documentation. What do you want informed consent around employee monitoring to be? What does that mean? If you put the lawyers in charge, you're doomed. And the last thing—
does your notion of inclusivity, when you talk about having a diverse and equitable and inclusive organization, does your notion of inclusivity extend to or apply to how you think about monitoring?
Exactly right. This is an element and an aspect of the future of DEI. And I'll just conclude with what we were discussing. You want to communicate your development versus assessment efforts. You want people not to feel that they don't understand the trade-offs that you believe are most important for the enterprise from getting value from monitoring, surveillance, performance management data. So we've gone on a bit too long on this. Allison, what are the best questions and comments that you're seeing?
Before we get to questions and comments, I do want to do a quick plug, and this actually does address some questions. So folks were asking, how do they access these reports, these articles we've been talking about? So I encourage you to look in the handouts module, which is a part of your GoToWebinar console, and you'll find links to the PDF versions of these reports as well as today's slides, or the URL at the bottom here, sloanreview.mit.edu/big-ideas will take you to the landing page, and you can explore the different topics that we've researched with Michael and other guest editors. This link will also be included in the slides that we circulated, so no need to rush off and do it now, but these resources are available to you. Let's bring our cameras back on and take some questions. Definitely been getting a lot of really good ones as we've been listening to you all talk. So we'll just give Michael a second, but I think, we started to talk about some of the key themes as audience members were chiming in. I think going back to the beginning of the talk, and we said, okay, well, we're dealing with these hybrid work environments now. We're dealing with remote, we're dealing with on-site, we're dealing with some kind of mix of both. Curious if you think that remote workers should be monitored or measured differently than folks who are, going back to on-site who will be in the office. I mean, how do you deal with the hybrid workforce in this regard of monitoring their performance?
Let me tell you what I would recommend. Let me offer I don't know the average size of organization represented here, so let me offer a free bit of $100,000 advice on this. If I was doing a consulting gig, I would say, as we debate the hybrid workforce, back to work, work at home 2 days a week, come to the office, ask people, do a survey, say, how do you want to be monitored? Ask people, how do you want to be monitored at home? Here's how we want to monitor you at work. Here are our monitoring and getting value from aspirations. So let's begin the dialogue on this, because it ties in directly to what David said about equitability between on-site and remote monitoring. So let's ask people how they want to be monitored. The only unacceptable answer is we don't want to be monitored. Tough. There are legal rules, et cetera, et cetera. I think increased monitoring is unavoidable. That said, getting value from increased monitoring isn't necessarily clear either. Let's use this as an opportunity to learn. I'm happy to, anybody listening in who wants to sponsor that research, feel free to contact Allison and David.
We'll put his email up at the end of the talk. David, did you want to comment there? If not, I'm happy to ask another question.
I mean, there's a lot. It's just it's a very different question when you're framing the remote monitoring efforts as like, how would you like to be monitored for our controlling you versus how would you like to be monitored for we would like to empower you? And
exactly. Perfect.
You need to be upfront about that question.
So this one, it's a little hard to unpack. I'll just kind of read it verbatim and I'll editorialize a little bit, but it was a comment turned into a question. I think it's interesting. It's extremely pertinent given the holiday we're about to observe tomorrow that takes place this weekend. Person writes, I believe better measurement on DEI, such as who's getting hired, promoted, fired, will give the organization data for how we can create more empowerment. And that controlling performance with data is inhuman and inherently based on or biased based on who controls that system and data collection. What are your thoughts? And I think the lens of, how are we, we talked a little bit about empowering diversity, but how are we accounting for, all types of diversity? That's your level in the organization, it's your background, it's your beliefs. I mean, someone else mentioned, to what degree are you paying attention to people's personal political beliefs when you're monitoring them? Do you just like, is there leakage? Do you see that stuff? I mean, how do you think about kind of this whole person at work in this monitoring effort, I guess is how I would spin the question.
Well, the Europeans, of course, have, and the Germany in particular, have very strict rules about, how much of the whole person can be monitored at work. I mean, I'll be very blunt. The way that I would, and I'm picking this word, if it makes me appear like a coward, so be it. The way I would finesse this issue is I would be mapping these things to our customers and our clients. I believe that this issue of performance and control and empowerment should relate to what is our purpose, what kind of value are we creating to our shareholders, to our stakeholders, to our customers. And so I would be trying to map empowerment, greater empowerment, to better outcomes for key stakeholders. In the same way, I would want to map better control to compliance and better outcomes for our stakeholders. So I would make this issue of the politics and particular backgrounds of employees subordinate to the issue of the purpose of the enterprise. They're working there for a reason. So that's how I would finesse the issue.
Okay, no comments from David. I'll give him the 2-second pause, and then we'll move along. That's fine. We talked about this at the top of the hour, and it came up in questions as well. The 360-degree review. As digital monitoring increases, do we see that returning? Or just in general, I mean, how do you see performance management evolving or maybe regressing? We had someone comment that they used to do 3 annual check-ins per year at their organization. It was too much pressure. They've backed off it. So I'm just curious, is there, and there's probably not a one-size-fits-all answer here, but are there any heuristics you might apply to this performance measurement, management, these conversations that managers have with their employees directly tied to the monitoring angle?
The cadence and tempo of feedback is going to become more and more important. There's that wonderful line from the late actress Carrie Fisher, instant gratification isn't soon enough. I think we're going to be seeing more and more accelerated feedback. If I may be allowed an MIT kind of response, I think we're going to move from 360 reviews to spherical reviews. We're going to be seeing everything they touch, from the supply chain to your colleague to your customer's customer. There's going to be data, and hopefully those algorithms are going to analyze the data in a way that that feedback can be useful to you, and that your manager is getting this, your partners are getting this, and they can help support you to get better along the dimensions that you want to get better and that they need you to get better. So yes, I think we are going to see the digitalization and spherification, if you'll forgive such a word, of the 360-degree review.
That's one of the least offensive words you've made up in a conversation. In terms of jargon and hyperbole, not actual offense.
We only had a couple minutes left in the webinar, so
that's why. Oh, now I understand. Thank you.
So let me just put a plug in. This is a little orthogonal to the 360 spheric. I can't even say that.
That's a bad geometrical metaphor, by the way. Orthogonal to 360. Yes. It's a flat land. Go on.
I can't even touch that. So there's a plug for self-determination theory. Is that when you've got, like, people have 3 basic psychological needs, according to the social psychologist you kind of came up with the self-determination theory. One of these basic psychological needs is around the need for competence, the need to feel competent, and another one is the need to feel self-determined in one's actions, and the other one is the need to feel related to others. And if the monitoring that happens, whether it's through a 360 process, a spherification process, or other kinds of monitoring, there's a real potential to undermine people's sense of competency, to undermine people's sense of relatedness, if there's fomenting of like feeling competitive, or like you're not actually part of a team, or like you're a team member, but there's competitive actions. And then really the most important one is you don't feel self-determined. And in this particular day and age right now, that's an issue, because workers have choice, a lot of choice right now. And if your sense of self-determination is being undermined by the monitoring practices in your organization, it may be harder to keep talent.
Right. To put what David is saying in a more cynical terms, if you're a leader, you want to think twice about if are you really going to get more value for more managerial control, or you're going to get more value from your people building on those issues of relatedness, confidence, and agency. You know, it's a business choice as well as an ethical choice. I think you can have the best of both worlds. I think that's one of the reasons why all of us are so interested in this.
I think we talked about, we're talking about monitoring what people are up to, and I think implicit in that is, what are they actually looking at on their screen? I mean, the Hub staff example, read that New York Times article, you can see it was a writer who let his editor kind of watch his daily work and, sort of an experiment into what could this actually do. So we're looking at, how much time is someone spending in a web browser? Are they going to Grubhub and ordering a meal? And how long does that take them? And, very minute activities that they're completing. One comment came in about, are we being a little bit incomplete in our analysis of this topic by not thinking about culture and interpersonal, I mean, we are thinking about culture, but cultural and interpersonal interactions and some of that more soft skills side of management. And I think one thing that came to mind when I read that was, think about Sandy Pentland and the badges that, people would wear, and they would, and I think, we didn't touch on exactly the ins and outs of how the EE system works, but that as well. Comment a little bit on that. How much do you see monitoring and technology helping people communicate better and measure, in a non-punitary way, interaction and collaboration?
Just to be quick, Sandy Pentland's a professor at the Media Lab, wrote a book on social physics, is a funder of a company that does work on these kinds of people analytics stuff called Humanize. He's, really good guy, colleague from MIT. But I just want to be clear. Everything that we're talking about, with apologies to the person who made the comment, we could have gone on and talked about the social interactions. There's social network analytics.
Analysis.
Right. We could do tone analysis. There's software that does sentiment analysis, so you can look and see whether a group that's exchanging texts or messages or communications, do they get along, or are there hotspots? We can do the social analytics where we see if people literally aren't talking or communicating with each other. All of these affective variables that can have effective impact, we can monitor those things. But here's the bad news. That means we're going to be doing more monitoring. If you want that insight into interpersonal relationships, we got to monitor those sorts of things. That's the deal with the devil you're going to make. The more insights you want, the more and better data you need.
When organizations are collecting data to improve their workplace analytics, there is an opportunity there. You want to avoid basically a hunter-gatherer approach where we don't know exactly what the connection is between the data that we're going to be collecting and the results that we want to be promoting and advancing with the analytics that we're going to do on the data, which is going to either foster more control or foster more empowerment. There needs to be some kind of parsimony around how you go about your data collection. Otherwise, it'll be too much. It'll be too intrusive.
I'm not worried about that. That's what the algorithms will do. We're going down a huge learning curve. I think we're going to improve our ability to scrape out the signal from the noise. I think that's a problem that goes away. That's my bet. And people like Sandy Pentland would agree with me.
Well, that's a decisive argument in your favor then.
We'll have to see how that plays out. We are at the end of our time, everyone. Sorry to cut off our speakers who are very energized by your questions. Thank you all for chatting those in. Do want to extend special thanks to our sponsor, ActiveTrack. Thank you all. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, David. Thank you to ActiveTrack. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much.